Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining Startup Impact Summit. So today we are on Growth Impact stage and we're super delighted to have Josie from Payme of HSBC to talk to us about no-code, UI designs, her journeys, challenges, everything you need to know about jumping into this industry. So without further ado, I would like to hand over the mic to Josie to introduce herself. Josie, please.
Oh, thanks, Felix. Thanks so much for having me with you today. And yes, my name is Josie. I am the product design lead at Payme from HSBC. So for those of us not in Hong Kong, Payme is a mobile digital wallet from HSBC for the local Hong Kong market. So people can pay each other back for taxi, dinner, cabs, whatnot, and then also connect with the local Hong Kong businesses where they can use Payme to pay with businesses either in store, on app, or even online. So at Payme, I lead a team of UI and UX designers, and we co-create with the copy teams as well as the CX, which is customer experience teams, to work on all the projects with all the products as well.
It
Yeah,
sounds
so that's a
super
little bit about me.
comprehensive, and I'm also a active Payme user where I use Payme for splitting bills, paying my family, and sometimes on Carousel we trade on Payme as well, just in case
Yes.
people want to know. It's really useful. I think it's pretty special. If I remember correctly, Payme is still a Hong Kong only application, but not in rest of the HSBC branches, other countries and city, and it's
Correct.
been
Yes.
penetrated to the market a lot. And if we circle back a little, like how companies or people come up with products such as application like Payme. In the past, when we come up with the design and building a product, it was super difficult. But apparently the no code seems been around for some time, where people can build websites, prototype by using tools like Shopify, Wix, Squarespace, etc. It's been around for several years. So I think nowadays people can really enter to these industries by using these tools, learn online tutorials, watching YouTubes, and they can eventually become no-coders or designers. But I'm also curious what brings you to your current position right now? How do you learn? How do you acquire the knowledge as a designer?
Okay, yeah. So actually, I started in digital advertising. So my background is actually visual design and advertising way back when in San Francisco. So when I moved to New York, I actually fell into digital advertising. What we studied in school was a lot of like traditional advertising, like TVCs or broadcast, radio, and some print campaigns to do like on buses and billboards and stuff. So when I went to New York, I did a lot of digital advertising. And back then it was like media rich banners, like how to make animated banners go from one banner to another one. And then when I moved to China, I actually worked a little bit on WeChat API platform. So we did some WeChat banners and WeChat experiences for brands. And then when I came to Hong Kong, it's when I actually joined another agency before I joined Payme. From there, I was doing digital transformation. So lots of websites, apps, consultancy. And then when I finally moved into HSBC, this is where I moved into product design, working on Payme now.
It sounds like you have a substance experience in dealing with different stakeholders, such as the agency, your in-house team from design, product, content, developers. I'm curious, how do you see yourself, or maybe by working with as a team, how do you bridge the gap, and what would be the key elements to design a successful product?
Yeah, I think managing key stakeholders, this is something that I'm still learning. It's never perfect. And I think it's one of those things that as designers, it's one of the harder transitions to make, just from like senior designer to manager. And then as a manager, you're also managing downwards your team as well as upwards the key stakeholders. So it is quite difficult, but I think the key point is to find the common ground, which is usually creating an app or the feature. Uh, Being on the same team, basically, we are all at Payme, right? Or you are all at whatever product you are at. So ultimately you still want the end goal, which is a good product or to make a certain feature, whatever that may be. So I think when you come together, it's about building relationships for one. And then for two, it's really about collaborating and kind of dropping your titles and ego at the door and just saying, okay, I'm a designer, you are a product manager, and maybe you are a developer. How can we come together and co-create together and actually get to this common goal together? And with our different skill sets, everybody adds different elements, right? So it's about managing that relationship as well as managing the expectations of what your team can deliver as well as their teams can deliver as well.
Yeah, I can hear and definitely agree with your point where collaborations or working together compromise each other, because at the end, we are all trying to achieve the same goal, deliver the product,
Yes.
make sure our customers happy, and create a nice user experience for our
Mm-hmm.
users. Is it okay to disclose how big is the team right now?
So the design team, I can say we have a handful. So let's say about 10 designers, including myself. That's across the UX, UI, and myself.
That's really interesting. And I understand, as in professional design team, companies often separate by different like procedures or segments, all the way from ideation, research,
Mm-hmm.
empathy, talking to customers, assume scenarios, creating wireframes, users architectures, maybe low-fi and high-fi fidelity or prototyping. Do you think, as a designer, is it essential to learn how to code or not?
I think it's a really interesting question. I don't know if it's that you need to, but I think that as designers, we are very naturally curious and very passionate, right? So we like to make things, whether it's, with your hands, whether you are an artist or whether you are a digital artist making UI, UX, wireframes. I do think that as a designer, it has helped to learn at least a little bit of code so that you know how to talk to developers. And I also have never met a designer who didn't want to at least try to learn code or at least are curious about what it means. So I think as a designer, you are very curious and you do want to figure things out. So with code, it's very satisfying because you can actually see what you are doing in real time. So as you progress, I mean, it can be very frustrating, but as you progress, you can understand how things work and how things are being put together and actually see what you are making in real time. Yeah.
What would be the major challenge? I mean, working with lots of stakeholders, and you have people who can code, who curious about coding, and I think this question's been around on many forums or community a lot. Like there's always misunderstanding or discrepancy between design team and products, or maybe eventually when marketers are ready to penetrate, put the product out there. How do you see these challenges coming in your current positions, or maybe in your experience in the past?
Yeah, I think that everyone comes in with their own skill set, right? And people come from different backgrounds, right? Especially at HSBC, and I think especially at Payme, we are a group of like non-traditional bankers, right? So a lot of us come from design or research or agency or consultancy, and it's not just the design team, it's the whole program. So I think people come from different skill sets of backgrounds and they are very passionate. So I think a lot of times what happens is they want to get stuff done, but then, there's either the bureaucracy or process of the bank, or, there's not enough resources, or there's a lot of challenges here where we can't get things done as quickly as we want to because we are no longer like a startup, right? We're actually a pretty big functioning team. So I think the point of that is that while we have different skill sets, we just want to get things done and we're very passionate. So what ends up happening is like people want to start doing things and they want to start learning code, but then, not everyone has the same capacity or learning of knowledge as that. So I think we try not to step on each other's toes, but I do think that we actually consult each other a lot for what things that we want to learn. So in the past, I have worked with one of our tech leads where we did design and code exchanges. So every week we would meet for 1 hour. I would teach him at lunch how to use Sketch or something, and then the next week he would teach me how to, do something in code or how to make something in Android, because I was more curious to learn more about Android as an avid iOS user. So for me, I actually wanted to learn more this way, and he wanted to learn how to work better with design teams. So if we can find a way to collaborate and learn from each other, I think that's the best way to kind of move forward together.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And since you mentioned iOS and Android, I would like to jump in a new question just to follow up
Sure.
your answer. Um, there's so many design systems and guidelines nowadays. Like Apple's, they mostly follow the flat design. Google, they have luxury design, and
Hmm.
there's so many community curated design system as well. And you mentioned you're curious about as a native iOS user, you're also curious how to look at and how to proceed in Android designs. And with a company as Cisco like HSBC, obviously you have cater a lot of needs and wants, different devices, usability. Can you walk us through some examples? How do you overcome this maybe obstacle or maybe something where your team need to pay extra attention?
Yeah. So I think, yeah, iOS and Android is like a perfect example. Um, Yeah, because I think a lot of us as designers tend to be more iOS users, but there is a couple people on our team who are avid Android users, and then there is one person who actually has both. So it's good to have, yeah. Well, one of them is just a testing device or just a separate SIM card. But I do think it's important to, even though I am an iOS user, I'm very well aware that my design tastes go towards that. So as long as I pay attention to Android and know that, oh, okay, maybe we shouldn't make every single app only for iOS and then make Android copy it, but we actually should move more towards native. And I do think as a designer, it's kind of your duty and responsibility to do that, what's best for the user. And as an Android user, usually you chose Android for a reason, and same with Apple, right? So you go that route, that device, because of that certain design style and that experience. So why should I, as a designer, take that away from you when you are an avid user with certain OS? The one thing that we actually do pay attention to is also accessibility. So one thing that we want to do is to make sure that all of our apps are accessible for all users, right? For everyone in the market. So we do pay special attention to paying attention to these things for accessibility details, like making sure that the fonts are the minimum size, making sure that colors are contrasted well enough so that people can see them clearly and that they pass the accessibility standard. And then we also work with the development team to make sure that all the buttons and the tags are correctly called out, these kinds of things. So these are kind of the things that we pay attention to recently, and it's more about also like how can we make the developers' lives easier? Like why should we always make these custom animated things when actually there's already someone who has already created it and it's called iOS or Android and it's called native. So why don't we go that route instead of having to create custom transitions or custom things all the time? Yeah.
That's very interesting. Can you also walk us through how would you translate from ideas into prototypes and all the way to a working product?
Yeah, sure. I can't give specific examples, but I can talk around how we do our process. So usually when we have a new feature or a new enhancement, it comes from an insight, right? Or it comes from something within the data, either data that we looked at or whether we've done research with the user interview. And we've heard this pattern and this feedback over and over again, that maybe customers want ABC. So what we do is within the design team, we have the CX team, which is the customer experience team. And they are a little bit more future thinking and conceptual and research. So they spend a lot of time digging into that insight. What does that mean for us? And how does that look for Payme in the future? Or how does that play in with what we have currently? So once we have that kind of user testing idea concept, we work with them, UI and UX team work with them to kind of create like a quick POC or proof of concept. So this can either be like paper sketches or we can do like a little bit more detailed like on InVision. And it just depends on what the feature is. If it's a brand new one, it might be easier to kind of give it a little bit more life. So we can either test wireframes or we can test kind of like light designs. And then we work with our copy team to kind of create something that is in our tone of voice and that is very Payme like. So once we have these kind of prototypes, we want to go through the testing with the CX team and with the user interviews. And from there, we're able to kind of understand the insight and walk them through, what it is, the concept. And also we ask them questions like, do you understand what this concept is? Like, is this a feature that you would use? And so we do different types of research, whether it's one-on-one, face-to-face, or whether they're quick online surveys, just depends on what the product need is. So from that, once we validate or invalidate, we take it back to the business and we have to prioritize based on all the other features that we have for the rest of the product roadmap, right? So once that gets prioritized on the roadmap, then we are able to take it into actual UX and start thinking about, okay, what is this actually going to look like? As well as working with the development teams to figure out more of a tech validation. Like, is this even feasible? What does that look like on the back end? And how does this work with our designs as well? So once we get through that very long process, we go through the UX and UI and then validating with the tech, we are able to push it out into development. And then obviously within the development, they have their own process of testing and QAing. And depending on the feature, sometimes we also have beta testing, where whether we do it internally or whether we do it externally. Yeah. So from there, once we get all that feedback, it's always a work in progress. So once we get that feedback, we kind of improve it and push it out. Yeah.
That's very interesting. Thank you so much for sharing the details.
Yeah.
And how long does it take usually, or on average, like from analyzing the data, getting the insights, and all the way to your beta testing phase?
It depends on like how complex the feature is, right? If it's something very simple and very quick, especially if it's like, oh, maybe we learned some data about an existing feature and actually we realize that people go to this entry point more than they go to that entry point, that can be very quick. It could be like about maybe a few weeks. It really just depends on what else is in the product roadmap, right? But if it's a much more complex feature, especially if it's something to do with the wallet, then we also have a lot of regulations as a bank, right? So we have a lot of HKMA things that we need to abide by. So that can take very, very long, like more than a few months to actually put things through. But just because we are HSBC, we need to make sure that everything is in check, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think especially in these couple of years, more and more corporates and companies are more open-minded to try new products, implement new products, maybe because they want to reach a new market, serve their needs after many insights and data from the existing users, and eventually do something to cater a new usage. So I think HSBC and Payme definitely did a really awesome job in helping individuals and also helping businesses to be more accessible to our finance. And I've been super satisfied as a user, and thank you so much for the design. We talk about the procedures of design, insights, research, and prototype. Since these discussions, we also want to kind of touch a little bit more the execution part, which is no-code or no-code development. Sure. Do you have any experience around this? Now I have a design. Daytime, maybe I'm curious in terms of coding, but when it comes to execute the product, it sounds like there's lack of clarity of how the progress looks like from the development side. Do you think this is something where no-code solutions can solve the problem in the future?
I don't know if it solves the problem, but I think maybe it can bridge the communication a little bit better. So just as we were chatting before, I think Figma is something that we want to try out, but it's very difficult to get a large corporation or even a large team of 10 to move from one tooling system that we are so used to into a new one. I know that Figma has, for example, a lot of pros where it's no code, but you are able to create very, very robust prototypes, much more than like Flinto or ProtoPie or Envision can. So I think what happens is that you can actually bridge that gap between the developer and the design team. So you can actually, help move along and explain to them what it is that you're trying to do rather than you creating a custom animation every single time. Or what people can do is also to even just Google any sort of library that maybe that already exists and use that as an example, or just give that to them so that they can use it from that. But I do think that it's the responsibility from both teams to kind of meet in the middle so that we can kind of bridge this gap rather than try to solve the problem of one side or the other. Because as you mentioned, right, it's just all about collaboration.
Yeah, exactly. Collaboration. I can also hear from our conversation just now, like switching from one tool to another is
Yeah.
also a pain when it comes to a company at certain scale, like your
Mm-hmm.
team. But as in like early stage startups, how can they approach this, and what's your advice in terms of selecting the right design procedure, framework, and versus tools?
Right. I think it depends really on the team as well as the product itself. Especially in Hong Kong, I think there's a lot of startups. So they're very small, and oftentimes you have like usually a one person who's like UI UX, right, for the whole product. So I think that can be challenging to find a process that fits you, but I do think it takes a little bit of time. Maybe you can join like design forums or design events or conferences like this where people can offer their insight and what they like to use. Because everyone has their own personal taste, right? Like even if Sketch works for us, might not work for someone else. So I do think it's about trial and error and just being open to trying something new and not being afraid to fail. Like we did a semi workshop with Figma, and I think it was just too much of a hassle because we actually went into the workshop thinking that Sketch would plug into Figma so that you can actually seamlessly connect the two apps. But then when we realized that if we want to use Figma, we have to transfer the last, like 2.5 years of work into Figma. That's quite a huge mountain for us, even if Figma makes our lives easier. It would just be a much larger runway to get there than, let's say, if you were a smaller mobile app. You can just quickly, because it's just you, right? So you can just move all your files over and it should be quite quick. So I do think process is not like set in stone. I think it can be flexible depending on what works for your team and what works for your process as well and your timeline. So that is always something that can be improved and can always change. Doesn't need to be like so processed. Like I don't think there is one size that fits everyone.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And yeah, procedure, culture, usability, whether you have a huge archive in the past. I mean,
Yes.
I think all these like companies or teams should really consider whether it's the right time to move, whether the new tool
Hmm.
can really solve some new problems or challenges. And at the end of the day, is yeah, it's so many tools nowadays, so it's really tough to make a decision. I mean, there's
Yeah.
so many things that companies need to consider. You touch a bit like particularly like startups in Hong Kong. Usually, UI UX is one person.
Yeah.
Um, I think this is also very kind of a phenomenon where Asian startups tend to have one or two people responsible to whole UI and UX or even research process. And while in the West or big tech companies, they tend to, first of all, they have more resources, but secondly, they
Yeah.
also have a more clear definitions towards UI, UX, CX, or even other subspecialists around these design spectrums. How do you see this, um, ecosystem of designers?
Yeah, I really think it depends on your product and how also the appetite of your team is, right? So I know coming from the States, I do know that they're very well defined, like, oh, once you are an art director, you only stay an art director, or once you are a UI, you never go into UX. And I don't think it's good or bad. I don't think there's one way that's more than the other. I do think it's really up to the preference of the designer as well as what's best for the actual product and the team, right? I know some people who just want to stay UI forever and like never move up, never do anything else. And that's totally fine as well. But I also know people who are UI designers and they want to learn more about UX, because that will in the end benefit how they work with the UX team as well as how they think, right, and their process of creation. And these people also might be the ones who are really into learning data, and that also kind of feeds into a little bit of your design process. When you are sitting in those research interviews with customers, you can hear right then and there, like, oh, this design is confusing, or it doesn't make sense because blah, blah, blah. And so from there, you actually hear firsthand the feedback from actually someone who's using it, that explains to you, okay, I don't understand this because you put it this way. What if you tried it this way? And it really, I think, opens up a new channel of thinking, and it prevents you from being very isolated and boxed into like one type of person. But I do know that there's also, especially in Hong Kong, that when they are UI UX person and it's only one person, it tends to be a bit overwhelming because you can't really feel like you can go in depth into either one. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I do feel the same as well. Now I'm wondering, what do you wish to see in the UI or UX, or maybe altogether? What do you wish to see in the design ecosystem in the future?
Okay, that's a good question. Yeah, I think as designers, it's not just about making things pretty or the best experience anymore. It's really driven by data. So I think if designers have more knowledge and interest and passion into looking for data or research and using that to drive their design and features, I think that would create a little bit more meaningful of products, because you're actually creating something based on something the user said or what the market says, rather than just something that you saw because it's like a new design trend on Dribble or something. But I also think that designers need to evolve a bit more into business. Maybe it's just the level of where I'm at in my career, but I do think at some point you need to think about what is the business strategy and also what are the business needs, right? And I think this helps to kind of smooth in those conflicts that might happen between product management and design, because design wants to do the best experience or these cool features, but then product needs to do something that's going to drive a little bit more of the business, right? So I think if we can learn more about these skills about business and data, it will kind of solidify our designs and make it a little bit more scientific and less more about what's trendy or what's pretty out there.
That's really awesome. And what's your advice for UI or UX dummies should do in the beginning when they decided to, now I want to become a UI UX designer in the future? How should they start?
Yeah, I think going to resources like Dribble or Behance, looking at people's portfolios and starting to understand these different types of styles or trends. It's good to also see different types of apps on your phone or on the computer. Um, it's good to draw inspiration from everywhere. So you don't always have to be on a screen, right? You can go outside, you can do other things in life that kind of help to illuminate what is your kind of creative thinking and your way of designing as well. So I think one thing that I did a lot was just practicing. Like I just made a lot of like fake concepts constantly. I think there is a thing called daily UI
Yes.
challenge where it's like 100 days of UI assignments, right? So it's quite aggressive. I think I only got to like day 2, but what it is that every day there's a new assignment, right? So day 1 is like create a checkout or something, and then day 2 is create a login screen. So it really gets you thinking into different device sizes. And what I tried to do is create like a theme, right? So everything was a certain like wellness, like because I'm really into health and wellness. So I wanted to do like healthy wellness products. So it was kind of fun for me to explore something that's a little bit different than my day to day. And I think it really challenges you, even as a designer or non-designer, to sort of think outside the box and not just look at someone else's Behance or someone else's Pinterest and try to copy what they do, but actually try to come up with something on your own. But I think that's a really nice challenge, but it's always good for a refresher as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. Just to wrap up a little bit, you mentioned
Sure.
reading others' portfolios, such as platform like Dribble, Behance, try to create some fake projects as a practice, learn new tools, and do not afraid to take your ideas out of the box. And last but not least, you mentioned there's some online challenges such as daily UI design, where beginners can really begin their journey and all the way by learn by doing and eventually become a designer where they have managed to create their own style. So thank you so much for your advice. And I think we are almost there for these sections. I'm sure our audience would love to get in touch with you for advice, for mentorships, and also extend the conversation. So how can our audience stay in touch with you?
Yeah, definitely. People can find me on LinkedIn. So just my name, Josie, Josie, and then NG.
Thank you so much. And I think that's the end of our sections. We talk about your journeys and how we come up with ideas all the way to product. And you also walk us through a really fruitful and detailed design structure in your team, the procedures, advisors, and all that. And I recommend all the audience, make sure you join our sections and make sure you stay in touch with Josie. And thank you so much for your attentions. Great.
Thank you for having me.